So I'm Carl. I met Jerry Hill and Andy Hill 44 years ago in ninth grade. And we became friends there. And then Andy and I seemed to have a connection, and we became friends just right away, you know. Still ran around with Jerry, and Craig Dye is here, and the four of us kind of palled around a lot together. We walked around when we got cars. We drove around. We listened to a lot of music. That's where Andy got me started in the love of music. Most of the time we listened to the Allman Brothers Band, which, if you know Andy, that's his favorite band. Mine also. We did lots of things together. You know, he was just a good buddy. We went to lots of concerts in the day. I don't know, tens of concerts, maybe hundreds. I can't remember. Went to the ocean at Westport. Went down there many times. Spent days down there. I'm not sure just what we did. We walked on the docks and talked to the fishermen. And Craig's parents had a cabin down there, so we stayed down there and just had a good time. Just did a lot of things. We went to lots of local parties. Back in the day, there was always a party somewhere, some high school party. So we did a lot of that. We really had more fun than is believable. And Andy told some stories about that. Sometimes they seemed unbelievable, but I think most of them were true. You know, and at times we got really close, and he knew me better than I knew myself sometimes. You know, he knew what to say or how I was feeling. And he was always there to feel my pain and try and cheer me up. He was just that kind of guy that would want to make you happy, always giving. You know, when I did some dumb things, and I've done some dumb things in my life, he always supported me when other people didn't. He had no question. You know, when I needed to know about a car, he started in auto body mechanics, and I messed up my car a few times, and he fixed it, and we talked about it. Or if I needed to buy another car, I'd ask his advice. He always had advice on what was the good thing to look for, and if it had been in a wreck before, and so forth. You know, I called Andy all the time. We watched sports together. We went to sporting events. We listened to loud music. That's why my hearing isn't so great today. We pretty much did everything together. You know, we ran around every day for years. You know, it wasn't until just recently, really, that we, you know, just because of the life is so busy, you can't get with him every day. And, you know, 19 days ago, it felt like I lost a part of me. So, I know that some of you have known Andy even longer than I have. I've been looking at his Facebook, and people go back to grade school. People remember Andy from years ago. And that was one unique thing about Andy is once you knew him and you became his friend, you were always his friend. He had more friends than anybody I ever knew. And it didn't matter where we went, whether it was, you know, local in town or up to Seattle or to a concert somewhere. He knew somebody everywhere. He always, I mean, if you've been with him and walked around, he always knew somebody. He had a circle of friends that was just wild. And from all different circles of life, too. It wasn't just one kind of person. He knew people from all different kinds of life. So I just want to relay a short story that his brother Jerry told me recently. And it has to do with Andy's regard for justice. You know, he was always on the underdog side and just saw right from wrong. And so his brother Jerry told me that when Andy was about 10 years old, he played on a soccer team back at that age. And after the games, he would go look in the Tacoma News Tribune for the soccer scores, look for the box scores, and they weren't there. But all the other sports were there, baseball, basketball, football, they were all there. And he just didn't think that was right. He didn't think it was right that they didn't publish the scores for the soccer team. So he wrote a letter to the Tacoma News Tribune. You know, he's at 10 or something like that, young. And he wrote him a letter, and in the letter he said, if they didn't publish the soccer scores in the paper, that the paper was only good for wrapping fish and lining bird cages. And you know, that kind of speaks to Andy. So from a young age, he kind of knew what he wanted. And not long after that, they started publishing the soccer scores in the paper. So we can thank Andy for that. So, you know, at that age, going into the paper, reading the paper was interesting, and he was always a reader in his life. And every day he would take the paper apart. He would tear it apart, read the whole thing. It was a mess, and it ended up on the floor next to the couch where he sat. I think Maria can attest to that. And he also, but he didn't just read the paper. He really had a diverse reading, nature. He read all kinds of books. He liked war stories. He liked stories about war. He liked stories about airplanes and adventure. But he also liked to read about serial killers, and kind of the way. And one time he read a book called The Stranger Beside Me by Ann Rule, and about Ted Bundy. And he read the book, and he brought the book over to the house, and he goes, "This is great." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "I read this book by Ann Rule." He said, "You got to read it." And I said, "Well, why is that?" And he said, "One time when we were hitchhiking over to eastern Washington, and we were somewhere along I-90 before we got over the mountains, a small Volkswagen with some rust on the front," and he could remember all the details because he had a great recall. And there was this Volkswagen, real nice, good-looking guy, picked us up, gave us a ride up over the mountains. He was headed to some college somewhere to visit some girls that he knew, and didn't think much of it. I had forgotten about it. This was when we were, 20 or 21. I mean, we were, way back when. Might have been before that if we didn't have a car. But anyway, he came back and he showed me the book. He said, "You got to read it." He said, "Ted Bundy picked us up." And I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah." And he explained what we did, what the car looked like, and you read in the book, and that's what the car that he's in the book with. So it was just kind of the weird things that Andy would remember. I didn't remember at all, but so was our claim to fame for a little while. Andy also had a passion for music, a big passion for music. He's all about listening to music, listening to the words, getting into the rhythm. And if you were with him much, his music had come up in conversation. Somewhere along the line, it would come up in the conversation. And or you could go to him and talk about it and say, there was this song that I remembered in high school, and you could kind of hum a few bars, and he would remember the song, who the band was, who the people in the band were, the band members and who they'd played with before, and what other band, and he just went on. He knew all the trivia about music. It was astounding. He kept reading through the years about music and had different magazines, and I don't know how he kept up with it all. But he also ended up buying lots of CDs, which I think are still at the house. He's got a collection of, I think, over 1,000 CDs because he was always listening to music. And if you had that conversation with him, he would go home and make a cassette tape. And so I see a couple people shaking their head. And he would put together a cassette tape based on the music that you talked about that he thought you liked, and then he'd surprise you with it. He'd come back and go, "Here you go." I think he made hundreds of tapes. I know I got a box full of them at home, and I cherish those a little bit more now. So he was amazing. He had that. Softball was another love of his. Bill Jordan was telling me that Bill Jordan dragged him years ago to try out for a baseball team or softball. Didn't necessarily want to play, but when he got there and played, he loved it. And he played for, I don't know exactly how long, 15 years or something. And he was pretty serious about it too, like standing in front of the plate when somebody's sliding in and blowing out his knee, so he had to wait to play again. And so he had a couple injuries that way, but he he loved playing, and he played a lot. He played hard. He played with a lot of teams. I played with him. He brought me along, and in the early years, I played on a team at Terry Tavern was the name of the team that sponsored the team. And I played for a couple of years, but I didn't have the ability, and the people soon passed my ability. I dropped out, and he kept playing with better and better teams. He got better, he got bigger, he got stronger. I think he hit the ball okay, but he just loved playing the game. He was very passionate about it. You know, they got good enough, and he got with enough good players, and I think some of them are here today. They played in, you know, like a tavern-sponsored team, but they played in local tournaments. They played in state tournaments and went to even to the national softball tournament one year. It might have been twice. I can't remember exactly. But they got really good, and he was really excited about it. So after I got out of playing, he would come back, and another thing Andy could do was remember details, kind of like the Volkswagen. And he would sit down and tell me how it went, and he would give me a play-by-play, game by game, inning by inning, score by score, situation by situation of the game, and you know, talk about who was mad for sitting on the bench and who got to play more. And it was amazing just to sit down with him and have a conversation, and a lot of times it was just a story. He was a great storyteller. He was also a big pro sports fan. So he liked the Seahawks, liked the Mariners, went to a couple of games now and then. But he really loved the Dogs, the Washington Huskies. That was his team. He was all about the Washington Huskies. And the other thing he loved was to hate the Cougars. And if you were a Cougar or even liked the Cougars, he was going to taunt you. And, you know, and then as he would put it, if by some miracle or accident the Cougars were able to win the Apple Cup, he would then remind, you know, and people would say, well, the Cougars won. And he would come back and remind you of the all-time Apple Cup record. So this is for you, Andy, telling people. So he would want me to let you know that after this year's Husky victory, the all-time Apple Cup record for the favors the Huskies 68 games to 32. So it didn't matter what happened. It's like, it's over, right? And, you know, I thought of a lot of things to talk about and try not to take too long doing it. One of the things that was a big part of Andy's life in the last 15 years was his business, his auto body business with Dan. And I remember when he started that, he was really excited. He was going to get out of working for the man and become the man. And him and Dan started a business. Many of you probably went there, had your cars fixed, or sent people there to have them fixed. And he really, he trusted and respected Dan. I don't know that he would have done it with anybody else, and I don't know if Dan was able to show up today, but him and Dan were pretty close. But I know in the last few years, like many small businesses, the economy, competition, insurance companies, a Scrooge for a landlord, it just slowly squeezed them out of business. And then a couple of years ago, they had to shut the business down, and Andy had to move on. And I know that was really difficult for him. He struggled with that. It's hard to be like me, a middle-aged white guy, uneducated, looking for a job, you know. And so that hurt him. That hurt him a lot, and it's hard to recover from it. It's hard to help somebody that's in that situation. You don't know what to do for them. There was so many people in Andy's life that I wish I could have it all. I wrote some of this morning. I wrote some of it over the last 2 weeks. I took notes. I have pages of notes and stories and things, and I can't tell them all because I don't have the time. But all of you have stories with Andy too, because that was the kind of guy Andy was. He was a storyteller. He made you feel like you were his best friend, and you were. And, you know, whether you saw him yesterday or last week or last month or last year, you could go a long time, and it would pick up right where you left off. He'd just say, "How you doing?" and shake your hand and start talking. So if you haven't seen him for a while, that's okay. Many of us haven't, and he's okay with that. And I kind of wanted to finish up here with Andy's biggest passion, which you might guess is his family. He was all about family. You may know that Andy's mother, Ann, passed away a few months ago. She was a very important part in Andy's life, and he missed her every day. She was really a stabilizer for him, and she helped him out a lot during that couple of years when he was transitioning into other jobs. His brother Jerry, Alex, sister Margie, who I think you want to be called Liz now. Okay. He really cared for you guys, even though it was hard for you guys to get together all the time. I talked to him a lot about you guys. He cared about each one of you in his own way, in your own way, and he loved you all a lot, and he always wished better for everybody. So I go back in the day again, kind of take the time machine back when my wife Vicki and Joanne and Andy and I got together. I think we were in our early 20s, maybe late teens. We used to hang out, and Andy and Joanne got together and had a couple kids. It changed his life for the better. We were a little bit reckless, a little bit wild, but when he had Sherry and Chris, it changed something in him. And at first he was scared, I think, just like anybody would be. You're not prepared, and looking back now, 20 years old is really young. And but he loved you guys. He loved you guys more every day. He couldn't say enough about you, and he's happy with you, and he knows you guys are both in a good place right now too. So that's a good thing. He told me that. When he became a grandparent with Teddy, he's a little bit older and became a grandparent, kind of understood what it was about to be with kids. He was on the ceiling. I mean, I think I had to put rocks in his pocket just to get him back on the ground. Teddy was everything to him. Teddy went camping with us. He brought her everywhere. They had a lot of fun. And he always bragged about how smart Teddy was. And I think you're pretty smart, Teddy, getting the good grades, do good. He would want you to. And then when Ainsley came along, she had some issues and had to be in the hospital a lot. And Andy's life was focused on Ainsley. That's all he did. When she had a problem and was in the hospital, it didn't matter what he was doing. He would drop it and go. And he was there, I believe, every time that she was in hospital. He was over at the house a lot. He was holding her. He told me he wished he could change places with her. He cared about her so much. And he just always talked about how amazing she is and how amazing she was doing. So his family just meant the world to him. And then when he married Maria, he was excited, really excited. I think it was the best thing that had happened to him in a long time. And when he told me about you, Maria, he told me about you several years ago when you guys dated back then. And I remember him being hurt, but logical, and said it wasn't time. It wasn't time to get married. He couldn't marry you back then. So when you got back together, that was it. He loved it. He was really happy. And I just wish you guys had more time together. It's been too quick, too soon. So I guess I just say, I'm trying to close, is that Andy was a great guy. He was my best friend. He was somebody I talked to all the time when I could. And the other thing, he wasn't about money. He wasn't about things. He wasn't about prestige. He wasn't about being somebody he wasn't. He could be talking to the President of the United States or you, and he would act the same. He would be the same. That was just Andy. His heart was on his sleeve. He loved his friends, and he was just a good guy. So I guess I would ask for you that next time you read a good book, maybe an Ann Rule book or something, or see a good sports game, preferably a Husky game, or hear a great tune, that you just take a moment and think about your friend Andy and know that he's with you and he's listening. And may he rest in peace.